watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. We are in our series on early Spielberg, covering his movies from the 70s and 80s. And we're chugging right along and doing things a little bit out of order here with these anthology movies that we're going to be covering today. But yeah, we're on episode 51. Had a good time last week celebrating 50 episodes. It's a fun little milestone to hit as a podcaster. So yeah, that was fun. But yeah, today we are getting back into our Spielberg series, and we're going to be covering Twilight Zone, the movie, which is an anthology movie that Spielberg directed a segment of and also produced. And then we're also going to be covering a couple of his episodes of Amazing Stories, which is a TV show that he produced in 85 and 86. And then one of those, The Mission is the name of that episode, ended up in a little kind of anthology I don't know that it was released in theaters. Didn't really see that in my research. Should have figured that out. It seems like it was like a TV anthology.
Yeah, I think it was TV anthology.
Yeah. But
it's on Apple TV as well.
Yes. Yeah. So that is what we're covering today. We're covering Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983, and a couple of Spielberg Amazing Stories episodes from 1985. So kind of jumping around a little bit here in chronologically, I guess. But yeah, it's going to be fun. We're going to have fun with this one and see where it takes us. And to explore these movies with me, I have a returning guest, Andrew Fossier, to discuss this with me. How are you doing tonight, Andrew?
I'm happy to be here. I'm doing well. Looking forward to discussing some Spielberg.
Yeah. Andrew, I don't even remember. Was there very many options when I asked you what you wanted to do with me? I feel like that point there weren't.
Yeah, I don't believe
any left.
No, yeah, I picked this because I watched some of the old Twilight Zone shows as a kid.
Yeah,
so I had kind of a connection there.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I was wondering what had made you choose this out of the few options. So I figured I'd just wait and ask you on the episode. But yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Do you want to tell a little bit for those that haven't heard you on? Andrew joined me for context. He joined me on the Tenet episode in the Nolan series. A lot of fun. And then you were on the Christmas movie draft episode, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun too. So he's you're one of my three-peat guests now.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's I think there's only a few of you so far.
Well,
so.
I mean, I knew I'd been here 3 times. I just remembering. Yeah. So actually, my introduction to Nolan, I found out when watching this Twilight Zone movie, was earlier than I even thought, because unless I just well, no, I'm sorry, I'm mistaking. The final episode in the anthology of the plane. I'm stumbling all over the place. I'd seen that as a young kid, and so that to me was part of the Twilight Zone. Like, I just was like, oh, that's part of the original show, and I guess it all is Twilight Zone. But anyway, I didn't realize it was from this movie that's in a way connected to Spielberg. So wasn't Spielberg directed, but
Right.
yeah. So I guess my first introduction
To
I
Spielberg, right?
mean,
Because
yeah.
I think you accidentally said Nolan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got Nolan on the brain.
Yeah.
Spielberg, definitely was thinking Spielberg. I wasn't about to say Batman. Probably was Jurassic Park, I would say.
Yeah.
And then Jaws, which I actually was able to see in theaters recently. I told you before you started filming.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping I get to do that.
Yeah. Hopefully they bring it back. And then I've seen a lot more of his stuff than I originally thought too. Like 10, and then Ready Player One, West Side Story.
Yeah.
And The Fabelmans, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no ET in your repertoire.
Oh, E.T. Yes, I'm looking at like the chronological list right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, E.T. is a little earlier, but yes, E.T. Which I actually saw for the first time in French.
Wow.
French class.
Okay.
Yeah, I was not fluent in French when I saw it in French, so
yeah.
Yeah.
Some of it can still play though, I think, even if you don't understand what they're saying. You know, you kind of understand the gist of boy with alien.
Yeah.
Alien's trying to get home. Boy's helping him.
Yeah.
Sad he's leaving. Yeah, that's good. I feel like a lot of kind of people our age, which I'm in my early 30s. Sorry, are you 30?
29. 1 year left.
29. Yeah, yeah. A lot of people in our kind of age range kind of started off with Jurassic Park, or Jurassic Park was at least one of the first. you know? Yeah. So makes sense to me. Yeah, I think, you know, I've shared many times my introductions, but to Spielberg, but yeah, it's been fun filling in a lot of blind spots. You know, we were kind of talking about that before we started recording. It's fun filling in blind spots as I go and covering movies that I'm watching for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
So, you know, my previous 2 series, I had already seen all the movies before when covering them. So it's been cool to kind of experience movies for the first time as I'm like covering them for the podcast. And that's the case with these today. I'd never seen these before. I was going to ask the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is the 4th segment in the movie. I have seen the original Twilight Zone episode that is based on. So is that the one you've seen, or did you see this one growing up?
I am almost positive that it was this one, because I specifically remembered I don't know if I've seen the original then.
Yeah, I think the original is in black and white, so
yeah,
that
that's what I
might
was gonna
be
say.
a good indicator.
Right. I feel like almost all of them are.
Yeah.
And then I remember it being in color, the gun, how sweaty he was. Like, yeah. And then when he opened the window and it's got his face pressed up again. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty positive.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's. Did you see it by itself? I guess.
I that's the thing. I cannot remember. I feel like it was maybe somehow something. It was something to connect with school. I know that.
Okay.
The environment.
Maybe somebody just showed that segment.
Maybe so. I don't know. Yeah, because I don't remember. I didn't see the others. So.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. Is everything Twilight Zone movie. I haven't seen a lot of the original. I had seen Nightmare at 20,000 Feet before, the original one, and then I've seen a few here and there. I don't remember a ton of them, to be honest. I know I've seen several. I know I've seen there's like a longer one that's like a Christmas related one that I've seen before. But yeah, I kind of would like to like go back and um watch some of them. That if this movie is good for anything, this Twilight Zone movie, it's like, oh, maybe I should go back and watch some of the like more
Yeah.
well-renowned episodes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll get into what we thought about this anthology movie eventually, but
Mhm.
but for now, let's just talk about how it got started. WB, Warner Brothers Studios wanted to make this movie, wanted to do a Twilight Zone movie. I think they had already brought on John Landis to work on this.
Mhm.
John Landis, at this point in his career, had made the movie Schlock from 1973, which I think he himself says was a bad movie. Um, but he went on to make National Lampoon's Animal House, which was a really big success in 1978, Blues Brothers in 1980, and An American Werewolf in London in 1981, which were, I don't think those were like huge successes when they were released necessarily, but were kind of became like cult classics pretty soon.
Mhm.
Big impacts on pop culture and that sort of thing. And he also had directed the Thriller video. Michael Jackson had chosen him to direct that. So
Yeah, I did not know that. That is interesting.
yeah, which that actually, I think the Thriller video came out. I don't remember what year that was. It was 83 or 84. But by the time they were making this movie, I think he had already like done the work for it. At least. But yeah, so Landis is brought on for this movie. Warner Brothers then brings on Spielberg, who, Spielberg was excited because he grew up watching Twilight Zone, and he was also excited because him and John Landis were pretty close. So he was excited to work with him. But yeah, they were both fans of the show. It's obviously, I think it ran from 1959 through 1964. Rod Serling, obviously the man behind the Twilight Zone. So they grew up watching it as kids, loved it. They actually met during the shooting of Jaws. He had come on because Spielberg was already kind of getting some writing done on Close Encounters. And so Paul Schrader had written a script that it wasn't really, they weren't really jiving on the script Paul Schrader had written it wasn't called Close Encounters at the time, but eventually became Close Encounters. And John Landis did some like reworking on that script. So they had worked a little together. The final script wasn't written by John Landis, but he did do some kind of reworking on that original script for Spielberg. So they had a little relationship working together before. Not a huge thing, but yeah. So one thing that was interesting was that Serling, this is kind of another like full circle, one of those like full circle fun fact things.
Mhm.
But Serling had originally like retained the rights to a Twilight Zone movie after he sold the series to CBS.
Yeah.
And his original idea for the movie was to include 3 original segments. And one of those was going to be a segment called Eyes, where a woman, you're already going to know where I'm going with this if you've listened to like the overview episode and stuff, but a woman is blind, and she is paying a guy down on his luck for some sort of new eye transplant surgery so that she can see. And so that segment called Eyes did not make it into a Twilight Zone movie, but it was the first episode of in the first episode of Night Gallery, which was Serling's show he did after the Twilight Zone. And who directed that episode of Night Gallery? But Spielberg himself. So
Yeah.
full circle. Yeah.
That is a wild ride.
So, and now here Spielberg is working with John Landis on Twilight Zone, the movie. They worked with Warner Brothers to get a percentage of the profits. And then Spielberg and Landis obviously working as the producers. They kind of worked on the structure, got this studio to agree to doing an introduction segment and then 4 main segments of different, Twilight Zone stories, and then kind of an outro or conclusion to it all. And so that is sort of basically the structure we end up with. The conclusion outro is kind of barely anything.
Mhm.
It's just kind of bringing back what was at the beginning
Yeah.
for 10 seconds. So I don't know that I would call that like a conclusion, but it does bring things full circle, I guess. But yeah, Landis was always planning to do the introduction segment and the first main segment, Spielberg the second, and then they had to choose some directors for the third and fourth segment. So Spielberg had liked this movie called The Howling from 1981, which was directed by Joe Dante, who was really not a big name at all at this point. Spielberg had also sent him the script for Gremlins, which Joe Dante went on to direct eventually later in the 80s. And so, but this Spielberg chose Dante to direct the third segment for this anthology. And then the fourth segment, they ended up bringing on George Miller to direct, almost kind of by chance. He was at Warner Brothers, I guess, prepping for the release of Mad Max 2. And Spielberg had seen Mad Max and liked it and was familiar with George Miller. But George Miller stopped by the office where him and Spielberg, or Landis and Spielberg, were working and talking, and they ended up being like, well, hey, why don't you direct one of these segments? And so George Miller gets brought on. So it's really like a pretty strong group of directors here between Landis,
Yeah.
Spielberg, Dante, and Miller. Have you seen any Joe Dante? I think I've only seen his segment here and Gremlins.
Yeah, I've seen a part of Gremlins, but I haven't seen. I don't think I've seen any of his stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen. Oh, I take that back. I did not know he directed the movie Small Soldiers, which I have seen. Just kind of like was that movie stop motion animation? I saw it when I was a kid. I don't really remember.
I want to say that sounds accurate.
Yeah, but yeah, he also directed Looney Tunes Back in Action, which I have not seen.
Wow.
But I know a lot of people have.
Yeah.
And of course Gremlins 2 directed that as well. But yeah, so Joe Dante, George Miller, people are more familiar with George Miller. But yeah, are you pretty familiar with his stuff?
More familiar, definitely.
Yeah.
Less than Spielberg, but yeah.
Yeah. I've always thought George Miller's filmography was pretty kind of funny, because you have the Mad Max movies from, Mad Max 2, Thunderdome, Fury Road. He has Furiosa coming out. And then in the middle of all that, you have The Witches of Eastwick, which I have not seen, don't know much about. But you also have Happy Feet and Babe.
Yeah, that's the one that
Babe, Pig in the City. Not even the first Babe, the second Babe.
The sequel. Yeah, that is quite the contrast.
It is.
I mean, just Mad Max and then Happy Feet.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I don't even know that I've seen Happy Feet.
I have, yeah.
So I can't judge it. I haven't seen it.
It's been a while since I've seen it, but I definitely have seen it. Yeah.
I haven't seen. Have you seen 3,000 Years of Longing? That came out a
Yes.
couple years ago.
Yeah, I saw
haven't
that.
seen that
as
yet.
Well,
No.
it was pretty good. It was. I don't remember like rating wise what I thought of it. I'd say 3.5 stars. It was interesting at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And then John Landis is kind of like a lot of old 80s comedies, like Coming to America, Trading Places, Three Amigos. I mean, he has a lot of like those old 80s comedies. So yeah, people are probably familiar with the, even if they haven't seen them, probably familiar. I already mentioned a few of his movies as well. But yeah, so all these directors have success before this and have success after.
Yeah.
Joe Dante, I guess, is the one that's the most like fresh, the most new. He really has not done a whole lot up to this point. Because Gremlins comes out in 84. So he hasn't really worked on that yet. He just has the script for it. And he did Piranha, which was kind of like, I guess, like, what would you call it? Homage to Jaws, I guess, but with piranhas, which maybe I guess is what caught Spielberg's attention. Yeah, all that to say, very interesting group of directors.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, very different tastes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so what's interesting is that what they ended up planning was for none of the segments to be original. They were all going to do remakes. So Landis decides he's going to make his inspired by the 1961 third season episode A Quality of Mercy, which I'm pretty sure is something it's something similar where like someone switches places with someone in a war or something that was like very unmerciful before.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've read somewhere else that there were some other episodes, one or two maybe, that were influential in what he ends up doing with his segment, which is called Time Out, I think. I really should have written that down, but I did not in my notes.
Oh, for it in this film?
Yeah, his in this film. Is it called Time Out? Or I think it is.
I believe so. I don't.
Yeah, it's confusing. His is the only one that's like a different name than what the original was called. All the other guys just named theirs the same as the ones they were based off of. So
yeah, it is Time Out.
Yeah, Time Out. Yeah, so his is Time Out, based on A Quality of Mercy. Spielberg actually had chosen originally to do a segment called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which was an episode in the first season of Twilight Zone, which I have not seen.
I actually, that's one of the ones I for sure have seen, and that's
okay,
to me
cool.
Like quintessential Twilight Zone. That, and then
Gotcha.
Time Enough, which I think those are probably like the things people would list as their biggest hits or the favorites.
Yeah, sure.
But those are two that whenever I think Twilight Zone, like there's a parodies all over the place, but the one that's sticking with right now that I'm thinking of, parody is strong, more just a joke, is in Futurama. They joke, it's a
Gotcha.
Scary door. You're looking at the scary door. So, but those two are
Okay, cool.
Monster specifically, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to go watch that one then.
Yeah, it's good.
Joe Dante chooses It's a Good Life, also from season 1 of the Twilight Zone. And we'll get back to what happens with Spielberg's episode, because he doesn't end up doing that, remaking that one. But Joe Dante's It's a Good Life. It's just called, his segment is called It's a Good Life as well. Um, and yeah, it's pretty. I feel like it's a similar thing going on in the original that happens in the segment here, and then George Miller took on Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is from season 5 of Twilight Zone. I think it's a pretty well known one too.
Yeah.
Um, in addition to the ones you were mentioning, so because that is one that I've seen, the original of, as I said, keeps the same name for his segment, and yeah, it's an interesting group of remakes that they choose. And they even planned for a while to kind of link all the segments with shared characters. So I think, like, for instance, the teacher at the end of the It's a Good Life was supposed to, like, end up in a car with Dan Aykroyd or something. Yeah, so there was
that
supposed to
would've-
be like some sort of
yeah.
like way to link the characters from episode to
Yeah.
episode.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of just abandoned that. There's a lot of ideas that are kind of like left by the wayside, and we'll get to why that might be in just a bit. But I do want to kind of talk a little bit more. Spielberg, at one point, I thought this was funny. Spielberg at one point thinks about bringing back Serling, who died in 1975, as a narrator with special effects, and abandoned that idea quickly. That abandonment of that idea has nothing to do with the disaster that we're going to talk about soon. It just was him being smart, I think, and not following through with that.
I mean, I didn't know that until I saw this in your notes, but I wonder if that's the first attempt. Because I mean, now with everyone, the buzzword is like, oh, AI, we're gonna create. Well, I guess maybe the personality of the person. You capture their voice. You can make like Photoshop for voice, and then also.
Well, I mean, you have like the deep fake stuff,
right,
which is actually pretty good.
Especially when they prioritize, and it's
Yeah, but so I don't know exactly what it. I read that in one of my sources, so I'm not exactly sure what it means by bringing him back as a narrator with special effects.
Yeah.
Obviously they don't have AI. CGI isn't good enough to make that happen really yet.
Yeah.
And yeah, not at all. We can talk about that when we talk about the like intro portion of Amazing Stories, which is like really funny to watch.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It just doesn't doesn't hold up.
No, it doesn't at all. It's bad.
What I kind of was trying to ask is, I wonder what the first actual, because like this was like, oh, let's do this, and then they pulled back. What the first actual instance of that was, because just recently that whole George Carlin thing, but I don't know if you heard about that, but they basically made a podcast with his voice, and
gotcha.
It did not. I think they got cease and desisted almost immediately. And everyone's saying George Carlin would hate this. Like, you can't.
Right. Yeah.
You can't act like it's a tribute. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I really don't know. That would be maybe if someone is listening and wants to write in with that information, and let us know so that I don't have to do more research, then feel free to do that. But yeah, that would be interesting to see. Yeah, so I think too, like the before we get into the disaster that ends up happening, let's I did want to mention too the writers. So I'm pretty sure John Landis wrote his own segment. But then Spielberg brought on Richard Matheson, who had worked some on the original Twilight Zone. And so he brought him on, and he did it a lot. He did the writing for the last 3 segments, I think. with I think with some extra, I know for Spielberg's at least, there were some others that helped with the writing too. But yeah, Matheson is the main writer for the last three segments. And he worked with them to kind of make the stories feel more contemporary, which makes sense. But yeah, let's address the elephant in the room, which is the huge tragedy that happens during the filming of John Landis's section called Timeout. Had you heard this story before?
I had not. No.
Yeah. It truly is a tragic story. Basically, I hadn't either. I kind of knew, as I was preparing to do this series, I had kind of seen like, oh, something happens with Twilight Zone, the movie, but didn't know until I was doing this research. But yeah, so during the filming of Time Out in July of '82, which was the segment that John Landis was directing, the lead actor Vic Morrow. Okay, so basically, the original idea for the ending of that segment, which, if you've watched it, is what ends up being the ending, which is we can dig more into like the questionable choices. But the ending is basically him being labeled a Jew and being like thrown on a train to go off to a concentration camp. Is kind of the ending of it. So that was supposed to be the original ending. I think there was some like talks with the studios, and they were like, "Oh, maybe we should do this, make the character more redeemable." Which I don't understand why. If you're making a Twilight Zone movie, why you feel the need to make a character redeemable? Because there's plenty of characters that aren't redeemable in Twilight Zone episodes.
That's kind of the thing. Like that's
kind of the point.
Not to make it all time enough at last, but like that's the thing. Is this guy has this bad mentality, and we're seeing him realizing he made a mistake,
right?
And he was wrong.
Well,
and he shouldn't.
Yeah,
I'm thinking time enough at last specifically. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about how it plays out here because
it's different here. I don't.
In Time Out, I'm not sure that this dude learns his lesson, but it's at the very least, it's like a cautionary tale. But so what they were doing was they were shooting a different ending where he ends up back in Vietnam and he's like saving two kids and like helping two I think Vietnamese children get safely across a river. So that's what is happening when this tragedy happens. So they're shooting this scene. Vic Morrow, who is the actor that's in the movie that you see, so they're basically, there's a lot that goes into it, but basically there's a helicopter in this scene that's flying too low, and the special effects team sets off some kind of poorly controlled explosions, and they hit the helicopter, which is already at low altitude, and the chopper ends up basically like smashing into one of the kids and then chopping Vic Morrow and the other kid up, and just like violently, they're killed pretty much instantly. I'm not sure what happened with the pilot of the helicopter. I'm not sure. I don't think he died because everything I was reading said it was just Vic Morrow and the two kids that died. So I think they would have mentioned if the pilot died. But yeah, so 3 actors killed. The investigations that followed showed that Landis allegedly asked the chopper to fly lower than expected to look more like spectacular on the set. There was some illegal stuff going on with the kids. For one, they were shooting at night. Kids, there's standard, even in the 80s, there were standards for what could and couldn't happen with children on a movie set. and they weren't supposed to be shooting with children actors that late. Typically, what you do is you shoot during the day and you make lighting adjustments or colorization adjustments in post to make it look like night. And they were shooting at night with these children. And you're not supposed to have children close to certain kinds of special effects, which they did.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I'm pretty sure I read that they were hired illegally, like they didn't have the proper like permits or like contracts in place. So just like
Mm,
all kinds of shady stuff going on.
yeah.
Um, and really unfortunate. And it's great. I was listening to a podcast earlier where they were talking more in more detail about this kind of what happened here. There's some like journalism done like in some books, kind of looking back on this, on what went wrong and all that. But a lot of it boils down to John Landis kind of having too much power and too
Mm,
much money. And, there was a lot of, well, I don't want to rub up against John Landis the wrong way and tell him we shouldn't do this because maybe he'll get mad at me and blacklist me and I won't get any more Hollywood
mm,
jobs. So, like,
wow.
the helicopter pilot had concerns, but it was his first movie and he didn't want to, like,
Oh,
get
wow.
blacklisted.
Yeah.
Apparently, the parents weren't adequately, like, told about the risk
Mm,
that their children would be in on set. There's just like,
yeah.
yeah, the more you dig into it, the more you're like, this is really awful. But it ends up just kind of getting in the legal stew of everything, and kind of nothing really happens.
Hmm.
I think Landis ends up being acquitted. Frank Marshall was apparently on set during the incident, but I'm pretty sure he like left the country shortly after. Um,
Hmm.
and Spielberg apparently like um, signed a thing with Warner Brothers saying that he wasn't there, which it wasn't his. He was a producer, but it wasn't his segment, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like, I don't know. I didn't really see anything that indicated that he actually was there, even though he signed a paper saying he wasn't. But he did sign a paper saying he wasn't. So I don't know how much, it's how much culpability is there for Spielberg? I don't know. It's hard to say because there wasn't strong enough investigation
Mm,
done. Um, Frank Marshall and Spielberg weren't even interviewed when there was an eventual trial in 86 and 87.
wow.
Um, so Landis was the first charge that came through was from the families of the victims. Landis was charged with manslaughter, and I think like the technical team also.
Mm,
They were acquitted. Nothing really happened as far as that goes, and then yeah, I don't think anything really ever came of it. Um, yeah,
yeah.
just wild, just really horrible. It really like became a huge shadow over this whole project.
Definitely. Yeah.
And it's it's just sad to see someone just so blatantly ignore like the standards and ignore the
Yeah.
procedures for
Multiple.
safety.
Well, I will
Um,
say the thing that this made me think of, uh, that I feel very differently about, obviously, is Tom Cruise, because
mhm,
Tom Cruise is breaking all kinds of, like, no stunt coordinator would allow a stunt person to do what Tom Cruise
right.
is doing. He's able to do it because he has got the power and he wants to do it.
Yes.
Like,
Right.
that's
He wants to do it. That's
right.
the
Like,
difference.
he has gained the notoriety and the power and the money, and he's saying, "Hey, I want to jump off of the side of a mountain with a
Mhm.
parachute on a motorcycle." I
Right.
want to do that. Like it's so admirable, that that's the
Mhm.
way he has gone with it. And then to see just contrasted with a situation like
This, yeah.
this, it's just
Yeah.
it's stark.
And there's other examples too, that don't necessarily end with death, but are like terrible, either traumatic or like giving injuries situations. With and it always seems to be happening with like directors that have a lot of power and a lot of influence. So like you think about on The Birds, Hitchcock's movie The Birds. There's Tippi Hedren, who was the lead actress there, talks about how traumatic that experience was. She thought that it was just going to be mechanical birds and stuff, but when they started filming, there were like handlers like throwing live birds toward her, and
Wow.
there was a point where like some birds were like lightly tied to her while she was laying, like live birds, and they were like pecking at her and stuff. Just a really like traumatic experience. And then of course there's stories on William Friedkin for The Exorcist. There's a part where they're like pulling Ellen Bernstein, who's the mom, like pulling her backwards or something, and like the guy's like pulling her too hard, and she says something to Friedkin, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah." But then nothing. They just keep doing it, and she ends up like messing up her spine, which is kind of like it has a lasting injury. And then on top of that, they broke Linda Blair's back. That she was 14. She's the one that is possessed in The Exorcist. There's like they made a contraption to make her like sit up really fast in bed, and it like fractured part of her spine.
Goodness.
Yeah, so just like, and it's like, I don't know, it's almost like this thing of like, well, for the sake of the director's vision, we should sacrifice like the safety of people. I don't think so. I think there's ways to it's a movie. There's ways to make your artistic vision happen without like jeopardizing people's safety.
Safely,
yeah. And how about maybe we don't traumatize people? We like let them act like
at a bare minimum. Really,
you don't have to like have live birds pecking at your actress for her to act scared.
Yeah, it's not an episode of I can't think of the TV show now. Something to do with fear, like scorpion pits and like that kind of stuff. It's like it's a reality show, and so it needs to look more real. You can accomplish a lot of this kind of stuff without endangering people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. It's a problem.
That's what I was thinking of.
It's a problem, and I want to I want to believe that standards are much better these days with all that. The only thing I can think of recently with a tragedy happening was the mishandling of the firearm with Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
But that seems more just kind of like a freak accident thing. Not, I don't know, maybe there was some lack of training or there must have been something that went wrong, because I think there was a trial. But
I actually haven't kept up a lot with
I haven't
with
either.
that, but just 10,000-foot view. Why would live ammunition ever be around a prop weapon? Like that's the
exactly.
And then how would the actor know? That.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if it looks. Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, I also heard that Landis was unhappy with the way like the plants looked when ammunition was being fired, like they weren't exploding right, and so like he gets one of their like effects guys, and they get a shotgun and like actually just like start like blasting away like plants or something.
Wow.
Which is not safe to do on a movie set. Anyway, just wild things all around. There's wild things happening in the 70s and 80s on movie sets that I want to believe her better these days. I feel like I have enough evidence of these things not happening very often these days to say that maybe standards are better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about it, I guess, in the applied way that you're
mhm.
talking about, but I do watch Corridor Digital and on YouTube, and they do like a stuntman react episode every once in a while. They'll have someone who's a stunt person come in and talk about their experience, or what it's like doing these really dangerous things.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like it's still incredibly dangerous, but
Right.
there's a lot more protection in place.
And stuntmen are doing it knowing the risk and
Right.
being willing to take on the risk,
Right.
which is totally different than
A
the things
kid,
we've been talking
right.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially kids. But yeah. So, anyways, like all this happens. It's really truly terrible. And Spielberg considers just canceling the film altogether, or pulling out of the film himself. And Warner Brothers, of course, kind of tries to dissuade him of that. And also his lawyers, I think, as I read somewhere, try to pretty much dissuade him from doing that. And I think part of it is they were saying like, oh, it seems like that would be like an admission of guilt, which is like a terrible reason not to pull out of a movie that had a terrible tragedy. So yeah, just not good. Not good things happening with Twilight Zone the movie. And especially John Landis's segment. So everyone was very like just kind of wanted to get it done. Everyone just wanted to get it done. I'm pretty sure even like Joe Dante, he finished his segment and then he didn't even like, he just like was like done. Like he didn't do any of the post-production work. Like I think George Miller ended up doing that, helping with the editing for his segment.
Wow.
So Spielberg, of course. So one of the things that ends up happening out of this, I kind of mentioned it earlier, Spielberg didn't end up doing the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street segment. He switched because that segment did deal with children and some special effects and nighttime, which doesn't mean that he was planning on shooting at nighttime. It just means there was, it just kind of like had all the same sort of bad vibes that happened with the first one. I kind of feel like it's more just like, okay, I know something like this wouldn't happen for my segment. I wasn't planning on having an unsafe environment, but at the same time, like, it just feels icky to do like nighttime special effects with children when this just happened.
But I'm wondering, I really wish I could hear the conversations that surrounded that, because when you're phrasing it, the way you're talking about it right now, it sounds like if the objective was to move away from having kid actors, I feel like you could have very easily done that in The Monsters Are Due. I know, I don't think you said you hadn't seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Do you mind if I like just talk about generically?
Yeah. No, go for it.
It's just kind of like people in a neighborhood and weird things start happening and they start saying, oh, I think, I actually don't remember, I guess, the setup, but the implication is that there's aliens somewhere around doing something, and oh, well, your lights are on, all our lights are off, so you're an alien, and then they just kind of start getting angrier and angrier, and then kind of just break out in mayhem. And then you kind of just pan out and you see the aliens talking like, see, we don't even need to do anything, and they're just basically monsters. So they're the monsters, so it's like, that could just be all adults. This specifically has kids. So yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting to see. Yeah,
it is interesting. It probably had something to do with that mayhem section of there's going to be kids around and craziness going on, and he just was like, let's just stay away from it.
There were kids here, but it was super chill. It was like not let's break the neighborhood up.
Yeah. Well, maybe Spielberg's was a little bit more crazy, because he dropped that one, and went with something definitely calmer and more sentimental with Kick the Can, which was um an episode in season 3 of Twilight Zone. And yeah, he chose this. George, let's see. Let's back up a little bit. So the Kick the Can is his segment. Let's do this before we get into talking about his segment.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and talk about our thoughts on John Landis's segment that does still end up in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
With Vic Morrow as the lead. It just feels icky.
Yeah.
But that's what we have. What did you think about that segment?
I mean, I think it just needs to be said. I don't know. I feel there were more uses of the N-word in that segment of the show than I think, specifically with racist intention. Like the characters were using it. It was a lot. It was a lot. It just immediately started off, and it's like, okay, we're 2 seconds in. He's being racist. He's being sexist, and he's pulling the waitress onto his lap, and it just was like, okay, I get it. We're supposed to not like this guy, and then he started, dropping in words, and it's just like, oh, whoa, okay,
yeah. I mean, he's like N-word this, N-word that, Jew this, Jew that.
Yeah, I can't remember. He uses a slur for Asian people as well, and it just
yeah, it's and then all of a sudden he's like, I don't know, it's definitely something that would never be made today. I think it was made maybe in a 1980s cultural environment where it was done with maybe good intention, but is very much would be called appropriation today. Because like what ends up happening with Morrow's character is like he walks out of this bar after being a bigot for 5 minutes, and then he's in like German occupied France, and he's being treated as if he's a Jew and chased around, which is like, okay, but he's not, and he's racist towards Jews. So like, why are you like, why is he doing? And then like he falls off a building and drops into like Deep South KKK meeting with a burning cross, and it just all feels in really bad taste. And he comes up out of the water, and now he's in Vietnam, being fired at by an American troop. And it's just like, okay, I don't know. It just all feels like it's for the spectacle of it all, and not like I don't know. It just feels like it's in bad taste. But we're looking at it with 2024 eyes.
I mean, yes. I don't know. I also was just thinking, I guess the thing that just made me feel so uneasy about it is if there are ever films today that are using language and imagery like that in a cultural context, I guess the one I'm specifically thinking of, because I've heard so many people talk about it, is Django Unchained.
Sure.
Right. And there's like this weight, and like, I don't want to do this. This isn't okay. I shouldn't be saying this. And I don't know. I'm totally just blowing air right here, but it's like to do a casting call and say, hey, we're gonna have a group of guys do a KKK chase scene. It's just, I don't know. It feels too close to the real, examples of violence like this for it to be. I don't know. It was very.
Yeah, it's odd, and there's a fine line of like, you think about like Black Klansmen, you have you have KKK a lot in there, and there's a degree to which, like, if you're gonna make a movie that has KKK people in it, then you probably are going to have guys
Right.
in white hoods run around saying the N-word. Like, there's a degree to which, like, yeah, like, that makes sense. And that's not, it's not so much that bothers me about the movie. It's more just like, it feels in bad taste. And then at the end of everything, like, it doesn't even feel like the dude, like,
It doesn't.
learned
Yeah.
anything. And what is your takeaway supposed to be? Like, oh, if you're racist, like, you'll get turned into the kind of person you're racist against and be
Yeah.
victimized.
I
Like,
mean, I know the people. I know in the context, I guess diegetically, the characters that are seeing him are seeing
Mhm.
him as these things, and I guess I'm really glad they didn't decide to do
Yeah.
blackface and
yes,
that's good, right?
right.
But the resolution just kind of felt like even they're approaching it from this level of privilege where it's like, I'm trying to make sure that they know that I'm not a
yeah,
Jew,
yeah,
and then none of
yeah.
this crazy stuff will be happening. Whereas it's like connecting his actions from the very beginning to what's even happening to him right now
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even feel. I don't know. Yeah, it just felt like the intention of the character the whole time was to exercise the ability to say, "Hey, I'm not this group that you're attacking." Even when he's being chased by the KKK members, he's like,
Right.
I'm not black. What are you talking about? And so it's like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's not great. Let's
No.
just say that. So, yeah, this first segment I did not like at all.
no,
As everyone listening can tell by the way we've been talking about it. Not good. Doesn't hold up. I don't really know how it was received back then, but with 2024 eyes, not good. So then let's do this. Let's end with Spielberg's segment, and we can talk about it in more detail.
okay,
Because I'll say this about it before we talk about Joe Dante's, because it feels the most disjointed from the rest of the segments. The rest of the segments are all pretty dark, and the Spielberg segment is like pretty like optimistic and lighthearted. And so it doesn't really belong mood wise. It would be different if they all had like a little different mood and atmosphere going on, but they don't. Like the first, third, and fourth segments all kind of have a darker, like cautionary tale
right,
kind of feel to them. That where not everything's really resolved necessarily at the end, and this one is like very neat and tidy. Everything's resolved at the end. You're supposed to have like a good feeling, and it's just like it feels weird in the middle of these other three.
Well, especially following the first segment, it was like,
yeah.
What's going on?
And then following the first segment, and then also being followed up by "It's a Good Life."
I think "It's a Good Life" was I mean, well, I guess first, I don't know, just ranking and like it, they were all disturbing in a different way,
right?
Except for this one,
right?
Yeah, which I don't know. I was thinking about like the theme or like what he, what the, I guess, message to take away from this one was, especially after the first one. And I guess it's more just like be happy where you are, kind of.
Yeah.
Because it was almost like a monkey's paw situation, because they basically were saying, I want to be young. And then they're literal children. It's like your options are 8 years old or 80 years old. And he even said that about the Haley's comment.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Is interesting. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and dig into it.
I'm sorry, did you not want to do that? Did I just
no, yeah.
Okay.
No, like I said at the beginning, like I don't really know how this is going to work because this is our first anthology film, so we're just going to have fun with it and roll with what happens. Let's go ahead and dig into Kick the Can a little more, because I do want to I do want to talk about what you're hitting on there.
Yeah.
So the original one was written by a guy named, pulling up the crew, George Clayton Johnston, who they do bring back and does have a screenplay credit on this one too. Richard Matheson is the main writer, and I think George Clayton Johnston was brought on kind of to consult and help with the writing. And Spielberg also brought on Melissa Matheson, who wrote E.T., and she is credited under a pseudonym, Josh Rogan, which I don't really know why, but yeah. And then, yeah, so, you have Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall, the co-founders of Amblin Entertainment with Spielberg. They're working as associate producer and executive producer for these. And then the director of photography, DP, was Alan Devillard, who worked with Spielberg on E.T. as well. You have Michael Kahn, Spielberg's trusty editor that has edited all but like 2 of his movies. And music by Jerry Goldsmith, who I'm not really sure what all he's done. Didn't really look that up. Sound by Tommy Causey, production design by James D. Bissell, whose name I did recognize and I think has worked with Spielberg before. I just don't remember exactly on what. I'm seeing if I can find him on here on Letterboxd real quick, but I'm not seeing his name, which is unfortunate because it would have been nice to have
I can look him up if you want.
smoothly transitioned into that. But yeah, James D. Bissell, Mike Wood did the special effects. So, all of them had kind of had their own technical crews that they brought on for their own segments. So these are the guys that Spielberg brings on for Kick the Can. Matheson, modifies Johnston's original script. And I think it was actually George Clayton Johnston that suggested the choice to return to old age. So the original story was a little bit different from this story. I haven't seen it, but I have listened to it explained on another podcast. And so basically the original Kick the Can story has 2 old men that are friends in this, old people's home, nursing home, whatever you want to call it. And one of them is the guy that like his son won't like bring him to visit, but that guy is actually like not the grumpy one. The grumpy one is his friend. And so the guy whose son won't bring him home decides like, well, screw this. I'm going to enjoy life and act like I'm young and have fun. And so he's actually the one that decides, whereas in Spielberg's, it's that character whose son won't bring him to visit that ends up being like the curmudgeonly guy. And so in the original, it's the friend that's the curmudgeonly guy. So basically, and then also in the original, there's no like Scatman Crothers character, the kind of magical guy. It's just these 2 friends. And so, basically the curmudgeonly friend is like telling the nurses and workers at the home that like, hey, I think my friend's going a little crazy because he's like playing in the sprinklers at night and he's just doing all kinds of like stuff that kids would do. And so they're planning on like maybe isolating him or doing something along those lines. But then before that happens, one night he gets like all the other old people in the home to like go out and play with him one night, except for the curmudgeonly friend. So that's kind of a similar thing. And that ends up with the Spielbergs. And then the old people, the workers of the home, like go look out the window because they hear about a bunch of commotion, but it's just a bunch of kids playing. So somehow magically they've all turned back into children. And then um, the curmudgeonly guy looks out the window and sees his friend because they were childhood friends. And so he recognizes him and he's like, they all start running off, all the kids. And the curmudgeonly friend is like, "Hey, can I come with you?" And the other friend like looks at him. He's like, "I don't know who you are." Like, I guess because he's a kid again, he doesn't recognize him. And so he runs off, and then that's kind of like the end. The curmudgeonly friend is just kind of left there as the only remaining old man in the, in the home. All the others like have run off as kids.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this is not. It's maybe not as chaotic evil as episode 3, but
Mhm.
why does the source of unlimited power always like offer awful solutions to the problems that the people that it comes across face? It's like, I want to feel youthful again. Okay, the whole home is changing to kids now.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, so I mentioned Scatman Crothers. He's cast as Mr. Bloom, the kind of magical dude that shows up in the
Mhm.
home. Scatman Crothers was 72 at the time, I think, and he was a former jazz singer. And Spielberg had actually met him while visiting Stanley Kubrick on the set of The Shining. Crothers
Oh,
was in The Shining, so um,
okay.
met him there, liked him, and brought him on for this. And I almost wonder if like he invented this magical character because he like pictured Crothers doing something like this and was like, "Oh, this will be a good opportunity to have him in
Yeah.
something I'm doing." Um, Only a couple other notable actors. Bill Quinn was in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. And I didn't see him in the credits for Spielberg's Savage, but I did read in one of my sources that he was in Spielberg's TV movie Savage.
Mm.
So yeah, Bill Quinn, Murray Matheson, and Peter Bracco both were in original Twilight Zone episodes
Yeah, that
back
is
in the day.
cool. Yeah.
And then you have other, actors and actresses. Martin Garner plays Mr. Weinstein. And Selma Diamond plays Mrs. Weinstein. Helen Shaw plays one of the ladies. Priscilla Pointer plays one of the ladies. And then you have all the kids versions of them all.
Mm.
And then Burgess Meredith is the narrator, and he is actually, I think if I heard correctly, he was in the most Twilight Zone episodes back in the day. So, there's not a ton of like recurring actors in Twilight Zone episodes, but I think he was in like a good handful of them. And he's actually probably most notably known as I can't think of the character's name off the top of my head, but he's the old trainer in Rocky. If you've seen Rocky. Yeah.
Mhm.
So he's the old guy trainer that Rocky ends up training with. And so that's Burgess Meredith. So that's probably a better point of reference than old Twilight Zone
Mhm.
episodes for people. But yeah. Yeah, so they get this cast together. He gets his crew together. They start shooting in November of 1982. Each of the segments, they had like 6 to 8 days to shoot. And so I think Spielberg's was shot last. I think Landis's was first, and then I think Dante and Miller had actually already finished shooting theirs, and then Spielberg did his, which probably has something to do with him totally changing what he was adapting.
Yeah.
So he was probably like, it's probably like, when you don't know what you're ordering at a restaurant and you're like, come back to me. I think that's probably what Spielberg did here with shooting his segment.
Higher stakes, but good. Good.
Yeah.
Good example.
Yes. I did read that he took every possible precaution that he could for having children on set, which makes sense. And then it was shot, entirely in studio with night scenes shot during the day, as we talked about earlier, to comply with the law on child actors. Basically, like making sure that he does nothing wrong.
Yeah.
With all of the, legal trouble surrounding Landis's segment. So, yeah, kick the can. I thought it was not that great, this segment.
I agree.
Yeah.
I will say, it had been a second since I read your text when we watched them, and so I actually had given Hunter my wife Hunter, incorrect information about which segment that Spielberg did. And when we finished watching them, she said that one felt the most Spielberg. When I was like, oh yeah, when I realized afterwards, she had already said that felt the most Spielberg, and so it. But yeah, I agree. I didn't really. It's kind of the same thing as what I was saying earlier. I don't really understand. I mean, if it's for older people, especially, I guess the mindset just really supposed to be happy where you are and don't wish for things to change. But I don't know. That's just conflicted messaging to me.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's I
feel like a better thing is use power responsibly.
Sure.
In all of these, use power responsibly, and you wouldn't be in the situation you're in. I guess not the last one, really, but
yeah.
It's.
I mean, so it does have some the only good, really interesting shot I can even think of is you have a couple of shots of the old people looking out windows, and it kind of is a good example of using your framing to kind of add to the theme of them being spectators of life instead of living their lives.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't even think Spielberg's doing very much interesting directing wise, camera work wise. It just feels like he's kind of phoning it in. And he probably honestly is. He probably just wanted to get done with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and then as far as themes go, I guess it makes sense as a Spielberg segment because you have nostalgia for childhood, which Spielberg very much has, but here it kind of feels disjointed. It's
you shouldn't.
Yeah, it's okay, you should want to be the age you are, but also one of the old people decides to stay young. And then it's oh, you should be young in your heart. And apparently being old and being young in heart means playing games outside.
Yeah, I don't know. It's be happy where you are, maybe, or be content where you are. But it's when the old lady's saying she wants to dance, she wishes she could dance.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just didn't connect with me.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt disjointed. It felt weird. It didn't really land. It felt like it was supposed to be emotionally impactful, but really wasn't at all. And then the twist, the Twilight Zone twist, is that Scatman Crothers is going from old people home to old people home, and apparently doing this everywhere, playing kick the can. Yeah. I'm oh, okay, cool.
Which again, I think was supposed to be kind of oh, he's going to this other place, but it felt, I don't know, it felt more destructive almost to me than it did positive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
Just overall pretty weak. I guess it's a little better than the first one because for one, it doesn't have a tragedy shadow hanging over it, but also
looking at the content, even I would say.
The content of it is at least even if we didn't connect with it and it didn't really it felt disjointed, at least it was saying something instead of just being look,
Yeah.
racist guy is going to a concentration camp now. Um, you know, so
It
yeah,
wasn't
I guess
harmful. It was just kind of bland, maybe.
yeah. Bland is a very good description of the kick the can segment directed by Steven Spielberg.
I did think the girl for the I can't remember the characters' names, but she was playing the wife, the Jewish wife.
Mhm.
She was like really going for that.
She was that accent.
She was acting so like an little old lady. I did think that was funny. Yeah, just I did get a laugh out of that.
Yeah.
Seeing little kids pretend to be old people was kind of funny.
Oh yeah.
Well, they were kids, but they were acting and the mannerisms like
right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the kick the can segment. I didn't like the first segment at all. I didn't like the second segment a little less. So not off to a great start with Twilight Zone the movie for the first two segments. We didn't talk about the intro. I didn't mind the intro. I thought the intro was kind of fun.
Yeah.
You've got Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks in the car, and they're kind of like just kind of riffing really and start talking. They do the little game with like the game show, and the Twilight Zone gets brought up, and then he's doing the like turn the lights off, and it's like it's like building in like the amount of like eeriness. And then Dan Aykroyd pops up with what I can only assume is his real face. He took off his actor mask and revealed his real monstrous face.
He got out of character. Yeah. I
don't know. Yeah, I didn't mind that. I thought it was kind of a fun little intro to the movie. I don't know.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. It was. I thought it was fun. I just the very first thing that when I saw it, as I was thinking, this didn't feel Twilight Zone-y to me. I'm not saying that it was like offensively bad or annoying or frustrating or something.
Yeah.
It just, for that to be the opening thing, I was like, this doesn't feel Twilight Zone to me.
Yeah.
But it wasn't bad. It was kind of funny, especially not to spoil anything. But when it came back, I thought that was funny at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think part of that is just like it's not actually like a Twilight Zone episode or segment. It's just like meant to be like, hey, remember the Twilight Zone? That's what this movie is. And
yeah.
So like functioning as that, it kind of works. Helping the audience like get into like we're ready to watch a Twilight Zone movie. Yes, that's what we paid. That's the ticket we paid for,
Yeah. It's funny that the thing, self-referencing the thing that everyone else is saying, oh, this is just like this.
Yeah.
Because that happened with, I don't know if you've, I don't want to spoil Monkey Man for anybody.
Yeah, I have seen it.
Okay, well, I will just say that movie explicitly says John Wick in it, like, and it's like neon lights and fight scenes. Okay, yeah. John Wick, but that's kind of what this felt like, except I would say to less effect, because I really enjoyed how Monkey Man was like John Wick. And I think they did a good job of that, without it being a cheap feeling call out. And this felt a little more like, I don't know. I didn't like these two, at least.
It kind of felt like, it was kind of like elbowing like the person you're sitting next to, like, hey, remember the Twilight Zone?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I didn't mind it though. I thought it knew what it was doing and wasn't really aiming to do anything more than that. And so for what it was, I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. He pops out and actually, I remember hearing, I don't remember what it was on. It was a podcast. I think someone was talking about how that little segment like really like freaked them out when they were a kid. because it's so unexpected. He just like all of a sudden pops up with that monster face.
Yeah.
I could see how that would like make you jump as a kid. Yeah. Yeah, so first two intro for me okay, for you I guess kind of okay.
Yeah.
And then first two segments we didn't really go for. How about the Dante segment? It's a Good Life. How did you feel about that segment?
I don't know. It was another one where like the setup was pretty, like when they showed the sister with no mouth, and then
Yeah.
like they were all acting very obviously staged and strange.
Yeah.
Like
It feels like Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
You know?
And then I didn't really know. I don't know. It was the most interesting one, I would say.
Yeah.
Is because there were so many. It took big swings.
Yes, and that's why. So I actually think I liked this segment, and I think that's why it's the most interesting. I mean, I think part of it is just like Joe Dante is like, what have I got to lose? Spielberg's gonna let me do Gremlins. Maybe I can test out some like freaky weird stuff here with these animatronics, and it's kind of weird and eerie, and then it's the only one that's like doing really interesting stuff, like technically as a film.
Yeah.
I mean, you have there was like a part that stood way out, was all of a sudden like everything except for the teacher character is basically in black and white, like she's walking down the hall, and it's kind of like makes you like do a double take, because like shortly after that it's back, like they're back in a room with color again, and it's just like it's like all these like weird visual cues. Like it's not just like the weird, the family being weird, it's like doing interesting visual cues like that indicate like something is wrong.
And like the unnatural lighting change when they like moved from the hallway into the maybe when they were starting dinner, maybe is when the lighting just like changed really.
Yeah, it's doing a lot of interesting technical stuff, and then I think too like the story is kind of eerie, and it slowly like unveils more and more, and you kind of realize what's going on along with her, which I think is pretty well executed. Like something's off, but you're kind of figuring it out as you go. And then the little like the like demonic rabbit is like wild.
That was the kind of the turning point for me, honestly, when I was like,
I could see how
interested.
I could see how that could be like, oh yeah, or like, okay, I'm done.
I don't know. Maybe I should give it a second chance, but it reminded me too much of I can't. There was that time in there where there were a couple of movies that did the like rotoscoped humans into the cartoon world thing.
Sure, yeah.
And like for both things that happened, when the sister got sucked into the TV and when that happened, I just wish that they would have been animated. And maybe that's a really nitpick, but it just like it didn't. I don't know. It just the way it was presented.
So for one,
too weird for me.
For one, like that technology wasn't really there yet. So that's one thing, which we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about the mission later. Or it might have been there, but if it was like not very widely used yet.
To be clear, I didn't mean like CGI.
No, yeah.
So those were animatronics, right?
Yeah, like you're right. You're right. The technology is definitely there. I don't know. I'm thinking of something else. Yeah, I think I was thinking of CGI, because I mean the technology like Mary Poppins is definitely there.
Right. That's what I more so meant. Is
you're right.
I feel like that would have been especially more fitting with the idea of when he said the cartoon, anything can happen in cartoons. That's when it started to be like, oh,
Yeah.
hey, this is he's got some kind of power or whatever, and things are happening. I just wish it would have looked more that way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know I'm contradicting myself. I do like the use of the practical, animatronic, and then the big swing of using that.
And I even like it's basically like a demented Tasmanian devil that like comes out of the TV. It's like spinning around with its tongue hanging out. I'm like, oh, is that supposed to be like demented Taz? And I don't know. I was into it. I was like, oh yeah, this is wild and like disgusting. And I was all in on it. And I don't know. I think there's a degree to which like I can just like accept like, is this like, does this look realistic? No, but is it like freaky and demented? Yeah, and that's kind of what he's trying to do. Like he's not trying to like make realistic looking things. It's like, cartoons coming into real life, like they're gonna look kind of demented because they don't belong there. And I don't know, he's just like you said, he's taking big swings, and I just like really appreciate that.
I agree. That is something, even though taste-wise for me it didn't hit.
Mhm.
I think this was the biggest risk, and I really respect that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that,
for
that
sure.
bumps it up for me, even though it just visually was kind of weird for me. I do like the commitment to that.
Yeah. Just like a game recognized game kind of, respect. So I'm assuming then the George Miller segment is your favorite of the four.
I think so.
Yeah, I liked it too. It wasn't maybe as effective for me because I've seen the original. So I kind of like you kind of like know what's happening if I were to have seen this for the first time without the original, I'm sure it would have been like, okay, is he crazy or is he not crazy?
Yeah.
You're kind of like wondering that as you watch along. But Lithgow is definitely the best performance of all the segments. He's like really selling it.
Yeah, he's very, very sweaty, that's for sure.
He's super sweaty. He's got all the faces. All the distraught faces you could possibly make. It's the creature design is fun, you've got like, I feel like I wrote down in my notes when I was watching, there's like very smart usage of like, you have the atmosphere outside the plane is like cloudy, foggy, and rainy. And so that like you don't really have to give a strong illusion that you're flying. You just have to have those elements in place where you can do the flashes of lightning, and the atmosphere looks like you're flying through a rainy cloud and stuff. And so I thought that was just like really well done, like special effects to add to the atmosphere. And then too, like it works tension wise because you're kind of hiding the creature and then revealing it when you want to reveal it with a lightning strike. Just really, all that stuff is really good. This is definitely like, I say the second, I said the third is my favorite of the four, but this is probably the most well made of the four.
I would agree too, because it didn't just have a good idea. And maybe it's because I have seen this when I was younger. Like I just remember having that, like, it's not only playing on the fear that we have of being on planes, right? It's also the fear of, I think the line he even says a line very similar to this, like, oh, like, it's crazy that your brain can make you see something that's not really there.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, am I being objective? Am I seeing this, or am I making it up? Because what's scarier? I guess this is the question I was asking. Seeing something that's not really there, or seeing something that's really there and no one believing you. Like that's the fear and
Yeah.
So it was
I
very
don't know. I
effective.
feel like
at
the
that.
second is scarier.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Because even if you can rule it out and just say, okay, I don't know. It's not all rationality. But the point is, if you know something is there and no one believes you, it's the same effect, except it's really there. Yeah.
You know what the best movie I think for that is the was it 20? It must have been 2020. It's the Invisible Man remake with Elizabeth Moss. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was incredible. But it's playing on that, and it's there's obvious themes of like believing or not believing women also in there. That you should watch that if it's streaming somewhere. I think it's 2020 because I think it's the last movie I saw in theaters before pandemic hit. But yeah, The Invisible Man. I can't think of the director's name right now, but it's Elizabeth Moss is the.
Now that you're saying that, I'm wanting to say that I did see that because it was like it was a spin on, like it wasn't the original, obviously. Like they were like in a nice house. It was a nice house, and she, I think I did see that.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really good. But and Elizabeth Moss is incredible, incredible actress. But anyways, getting back off that bunny trail. It's definitely like the interesting thought there with Nightmare at 20,000 feet is just that question, like what's scarier, having hallucinations or like people not believing you when you're telling the truth? Like, definitely the latter. So and then you get him going off in the ambulance, and who's driving but Dan Aykroyd, the ambulance, which is pretty funny. And then he says something that hints at he's going to like do Monster Face again, but it doesn't really show it.
He was you want to see something scary?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah.
It's really what's your favorite scary movie kind of level almost.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's quite as iconic as what's your favorite scary movie.
Sure.
But yeah. You want to see something scary? And then he pulls the face out. Yeah, that was so funny.
If I'm not mistaken, it doesn't show him actually do that. It just kind of like does a zoom out wide
zoom out
shot
onto the ambulance.
Yeah, and then the movie ends. Twilight Zone.
Which is just it's sad because you see the evidence that he was right, and you're like, oh, okay, so he's vindicated.
Yeah.
And like, maybe it's not going to be
really
awful. No, he's not. Well, I don't know. Just in the sense that no one, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
For the reveal to happen that it was reliable narration, he was really there, he was really seeing it, and then he get pulled away, and it's like, oh, bad luck, dude. You got the worst ambulance driver.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know what made me think about this, but have you seen any of the newer Jordan Peele produced Twilight Zone?
Yes.
I haven't seen any of it. Is it any good?
So I've seen Nope and Us.
No, not his movies. So he like produced and hosted like a new Twilight Zone series.
Oh, no. Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna look this up because I don't know I don't think it's still like running or anything. But yeah, he did it. It was Twilight Zone series. Well, now it's not coming up. Twilight Zone.
I would be very interested to see that because I was gonna say I really like what he's done with.
Okay, 2019 to 2020. It looks like there was 20 episodes, and they ran like from anywhere from 30 minutes to like just under an hour.
Cool.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of these. There's 2 seasons. Yeah, I'm interested to check it out because I've heard it's pretty good.
Well, yeah, and especially just for the way that he I would say very quickly builds tense atmospheres. Like I'm specifically thinking Us and Nope, I guess.
Yeah.
Just great, like get you into this the scene, and that, to me, that's kind of what I'm not saying I don't like the full thing, right? The full film.
Right.
He sets the scene up really well, and then I would say wraps it up pretty well too, or at least it leaves you asking questions about it. I feel like with the stuff with Twilight Zone, it's kind of like it sets you up and then it just gets you and then it's done. And I feel like that he would be really good at that.
Yeah. So he like does the narration and hosting, and produced it. And he didn't direct any of the episodes, but he did do, I think this is on IMDb, it's saying written by, and it says 20 episodes. Developed by, story by, written by, 20 episodes. So I don't think he was like, because there's a bunch of other writers too. So I think maybe he just like, kind of like, as we'll get into Amazing Stories, Spielberg did direct a couple of them, but all of the stories were like from his ideas, which we'll talk about. But it seems like maybe that's a similar thing here with Jordan Peele, and this more recent Twilight Zone series. But yeah, I might have to check I'm gonna have to go check out some original Twilight Zone episodes, and then also maybe a few of I might look at like maybe what are the most highly rated of Peele's series and watch those. So yeah. So anyways, wrapping up Twilight Zone the movie. Spielberg, and I think maybe some of the others refused to attend the end of shooting wrap party, and he kind of is absent from most of the post-production work, and it just shows like that he's just ready to move on. So it releases in June of 1983. I think it had a $10 million budget total, and ends up with a worldwide box office of $29.45 million. So doesn't do terrible on return. More than almost triples its budget. So it doesn't suffer financially. It did suffer the usual fate of anthology films, as far as its reception, which really is just a lot of times with an anthology film, all the segments just kind of get compared to the others. And so, just like we've just done here on the podcast. And so like the whole suffers a bit from the inner comparison of, different segments to one another. Yeah. And I think that is different when you have an anthology film where it's the same director all the way through. So like I'm thinking of like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs by the Coens, or The French Dispatch by Wes Anderson. Like those are a little different. Like, do you compare the segments to each other? Yeah, maybe. But there's like more of a directorial vision going through all of them. And so it's
a through line. And
so, but yeah, this suffered. It wasn't terribly well received. I think it feels like it probably was mixed by audiences. I'm sure a lot of people went and saw this movie because they really enjoyed the original series, and probably for the most part probably enjoyed this. I would imagine it was fun to go watch this in theaters, if you were a fan of the original series. But yeah, and then what ends up happening is the critical reviews mostly acclaim Joe Dante and George Miller, while violently criticizing Spielberg and Landis. And that kind of lines up with our thoughts on that. When I read that, I was like, that checks out. That's how I felt after watching it. Maybe not violently criticizing, but
I would not say violent criticism of Spielberg's work here.
Yeah, not Spielberg's. Landis's I didn't care for at all. But anyways, we already talked about that, so I don't have to keep harping on it. I did write down Vincent Canby, writing for the New York Times, described Spielberg's work as inept and
Ooh.
said, quote, "A lot of money and several lives might have been saved if the producers had just re-released the original programs," unquote. So yeah,
that's
pretty scathing
Yeah.
criticism there. And I feel like it was worth getting an interesting Joe Dante segment and George Miller segment, but for the most part, he's probably not completely wrong there.
Yeah.
So, but we have a Twilight Zone the movie. It exists. I did write down John Lithgow did get some recognition. Obviously not like not an Oscar, but I think he did win a supporting actor award for something. I can't even remember what it was. It wasn't like a major award show. It was like kind of like it might have even been one of the like sub academy thing. The academy has like the Oscars, but they also have a lot of like sub awards segments, and so I think it might have been one of those. But yeah, I think just thinking about this, you you kind of just have to talk about like the horror of studios and directors with too much power and leeway. Um, Instead of talking about the well-made Twilight Zone horror, like the main thing that kind of overshadows this movie is just the horror of having too much power. Which I think is unfortunate,
Which means kind of, I know I kind of said that earlier about, I mean, that definitely is, episode 3 is like, misused power is dangerous and can harm people.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, especially applied there. But yeah, that is a very sad reality about this.
And it just sucks because like it gets lost in legal stew, and then like no one ends up taking responsibility. No one, and I don't know. And then WB airs the film with that segment where the tragedy happened. And I guess they just decided, well, we weren't able to film this other ending, so I guess we'll just use the original ending. And apparently I even read that they like somewhat like not explicitly but implicitly blame the victims because they knew what risk they were taking.
Oh my
goodness. If you look into like the investigations and some of the people they talked to that were on set, like they absolutely didn't know the risk that they were taking. They weren't adequately informed about what was going to be happening. And so yeah, just all around terrible. Studios and directors should not have so much power and leeway. Maybe we'll talk more about that later on in the show. For now, I think we can move into amazing stories. Before preparing for this series, I was not aware of amazing stories.
Neither was I.
Yeah, apparently there was like a more recent. Is it an Apple TV series? Or
yes, it actually confused me when I was looking for this because not only is it, I mean, it's called Amazing Stories. The one about the B-2 bomber, it's not named The Mission, but it's the same thing. It's the same idea.
Gotcha.
I think it's just a remake of this.
Gotcha.
The Mission. Yeah, but it's called something else. I can't remember.
Yeah.
What it's called.
Well, yeah, that's confusing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a more recent one. But yeah, this NBC worked with Spielberg on this with no hesitation. I want to say it was Spielberg's kind of like brainchild. I think it's maybe just the result of him having so many ideas, and with limited time and money, you can't create all of your ideas. And so I think this maybe was just like an outlet of like, how do I take, how do I make all of these ideas into something?
Yeah.
And so in 1985, it's kind of the TV event of the year. Obviously, with Spielberg's name attached to it, um, you know, it's a big deal. It does end up with 44 episodes over 2 seasons. Each segment is approximately like 30 minutes, 25, 30
Yeah.
minutes.
I was surprised how many seasons. Like there was a lot of episodes.
Yeah, there's like, I guess 22 per season, which is what you usually can expect from I don't know. These days, you never know how many episodes are going to be in a season of something because you've got miniseries and you've got sitcoms and whatever. But yeah, and then each segment too had about a $800,000 to $1 million budget. So yeah, Universal when they were preparing, Universal suggested Spielberg to do an intro outro like Rod Serling did for Twilight Zone, or at least to put his name in the title, like Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Put his name in the title, and so more people are drawn. But Spielberg refused. He didn't want to put himself forward in it. He just wanted to make his thing, which is respectable, I think. I kind of, when I read that, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, he wasn't really wanting, his name is going to pop up at the beginning of every episode, produced by Steven Spielberg or story by Steven Spielberg or whatever. But he didn't want to be the center of attention with it, I guess. It's kind of hard not to be when you're Steven Spielberg. Like, people know, but he was like, okay, let's not like drill this into people that, oh, it's Steven Spielberg. It's just, I want my stories made,
Right. No, that's what I was gonna say. That does seem to be the motivation looking at it this way, because I was just thinking of how many examples of personality. Well, I can't think of a good way to phrase it, but basically when you see a trailer and it's just like this person, like it's who's in it, not like that's the focus as opposed to who they're playing or the content of the thing.
Yeah. Which I think there's a place for that. Like, I think there, I was actually saying to my wife the other day, you don't get a ton of movies these days where it's like, this is a movie star movie. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. I'm going to see it because it's Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. You used to get more of those, but you don't anymore. And so that's one reason I'm kind of excited to go see Fall Guy, because it's like, I don't really care what it's about, but it's it's Emily Blunt and Ryan Gosling, and I just want to watch them be awesome in a movie. So there's definitely a place for that, but I do agree that that's not really what you want to do with something like this. Like, you don't want it to be, Spielberg didn't really want it to be about like, oh, this is a Spielberg thing. He just wanted his stories to be made, and which, like I said, I respect. It was close to his heart. He's, kind of thinking of these as like stories. You hop on your dad's lap before bed and read or listen to a bedtime story kind of thing. He has this, like I said, this notebook of ideas, and he just doles out these ideas to scriptwriters and finds directors. He gets people he admires to direct, like Martin Scorsese, Clint Eastwood, Robert Zemeckis, Joe Dante does one, Irvin Kershner. He gives episodes to people he is hoping to like help launch their careers, like Phil Joannou, Kevin Reynolds, and Brad Bird. Brad Bird's the one that I recognized there. And then, he gives episodes to some faithful colleagues like Matthew Robbins, Michael D. Moore, Joan Darling, Norman Reynolds. And then, of course, takes 2 episodes for himself because, he wants to make some stories too.
Yeah.
And those 2 episodes that he made himself were Ghost Train which was season 1, episode 1. And then he also did the 5th episode of the first season called The Mission. And so, yeah, I will say The Mission ends up in, I think, as I said at the beginning of the episode, it's like a little televised anthology of a few. I think it's The Mission. Here, I'll make sure I get this right. The Mission, Mummy, Daddy, and Go to the Head of the Class are the 3 that kind of get lumped together. And I think I want to say Go to the Head of the Class was directed by Robert Zemeckis, and Mummy Daddy was directed by William Deere, who doesn't have a lot of great movies. The only thing I'd really even recognize is Angels in the Outfield. But yeah, so those kind of end up coming out as like a feature anthology kind of thing. So that's part of that was part of the inspiration for including this, but also just I like, we're talking about Spielberg as a director in his career. So even if it wasn't in an anthology, I think it would still be, it still like fits really well talking about this alongside the Twilight Zone movies, the Twilight Zone, the movie, because I feel like there's some similar like things going on here with the kind of episodic. It's really like Spielberg's return to, making episodic things, coming back to TV. He started in TV, coming back to TV now. Yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, so let's kind of just talk about each of these individually. Ghost Train was the first episode. And you said you went and checked that out today.
Yeah.
I actually just watched it last night. So pretty fresh on my mind. He brings back Alan Davio, who was with him, I know, in E.T. and was with him for his segment of the Twilight Zone. I don't know if he's worked with him other than those. I didn't really look into that. But anyways, so bringing back on him and John Williams for the music, of course. It's got to be John Williams. And so I don't know if John Williams did all of the music for Amazing Stories, like every episode. I didn't really look into that.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's probably similar to what they did with Twilight Zone the movie, which is your director kind of brings with them their own little technical team.
Yeah, there's their crew.
So John Williams is who Spielberg gets to bring on with him for his crew. Frank Deese wrote the screenplay based off of Spielberg's idea. And then I could rattle off these guys. I think notably Michael C. Moore is notable for the sound in this, the visual effects, William Riley and DreamQuest Images doing the visual effects, the set decorator Gregory Garrison, art direction by Richard B. Lewis. I think those guys are worth mentioning because I do think that like the set decoration and art design and the sound and visual effects like come into play, especially towards the end of this episode. Pretty good effect, I think. So yeah. And then for the cast, you have Robert Blossom as the kind of old man grandpa. I honestly don't know the character's name. I just know he was the grandpa.
Yeah.
I think the boy calls him Old Pa or something like that. And he had worked with Spielberg before. He played the farmer guy in Close Encounters. That's sitting on the side of the road waiting to see the UFOs. I actually forgot that he was in that, and when he popped up on screen, I'm like, oh, the old man from Home Alone is is in this. Um, but yeah, that's Robert Blossom. He wasn't in a ton of stuff, but he was definitely the old man in Home Alone.
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of the character, but yeah,
Oh, I can't think of his name either.
yeah,
You hadn't asked me. The shovel, and I
yeah.
can't. Yeah.
Either the snow shovel, but yeah. Scott Paulin and Gail Edwards play the parents. They're kind of just experienced TV actors. And then the real star was Lucas Haas, who plays the 9-year-old boy. He actually went on to have. He's still make in a lot of really good movies. So I don't know that he's like has a lot of like big lead roles, but he's definitely like recognizable. Like, oh yeah, I remember he was in that sort of guy. Um, and yeah, Spielberg had seen his performance in Peter Weir's movie Witness, was impressed with his performance and brought him on. There's also in the final scene, I think like in the train, Drew Barrymore is in there as a kid, kind of.
Wow.
I guess
Yeah.
I don't know why he brought her on just for like that tiny little thing, but yeah, brought on Drew Barrymore, and his mother-in-law Priscilla Pointer was also on the train there at the end. But yeah, this is filmed entirely at Universal Sound Stages. He was actually, while they were filming, David Lean came and visited him of um my mind just went totally blank. Lawrence of Arabia fame, which was one of Spielberg's favorite movies. So he came. Spielberg was like, "Hey, you should direct an episode," and Lean found out that they had 6 to 8 days to finish their film, and Lean was like, "Well, if you add a zero to those numbers, I might consider it. Give me a 60 to 80 days, and I might consider it." Which didn't happen, but this one also began a long collaboration with set designer Rick Carter for Spielberg. So which I think makes sense, because you look at the set design of this and you're like, oh, the house is just really well designed. The way that the train breaks into the house it all like works pretty effectively, I think. So that makes sense. But yeah, it airs in September 29th of 1985. Spielberg kind of, well, let's talk about this segment before we talk about kind of its reception. I kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was. I feel like I'm slightly positive on it, I guess. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It didn't really connect with me emotionally. But it feels like it's supposed to be emotionally sentimental. Just didn't connect with me. It's just kind of like it ended, and I was like, "Oh, that was nice."
Yeah.
It was kind of that sort of episode, I guess.
Kind of the same for me. I did just get a kick out of the grandpa though.
Yeah.
When he's going through the house and he's like, "Oh, we gotta take the." He's just like, "We gotta take the belongings out. So you gotta take the important stuff out of the breakable stuff out the way."
Well, I like how
it was really was funny.
I like how when they get to the house. So if you're listening, you may or may not have watched this, and you may or may not be planning on watching this. But basically, like there's a couple and their son bringing the husband's father to their new house that they've built on this land, and you slowly figure out that the old man, when he was a boy, had like been listening with his ear to the train tracks for a train that used to go through there, and like fell asleep, and the conductor like saw him up ahead and tried to hit the brakes or something, but it derailed the train, and like big train crash, and he woke up and was fine, but there was like this huge disaster of a train crash that he caused. And so they've built their house apparently he kind of like there's a portion where he's like walking around the fields around the house with his grandson, and he's I guess trying to figure out like where did the train crash exactly, and they're finding rail ties and spikes and stuff, and um basically he like does some like stuff with his hands, and he's like it's this
Yeah.
way, and he's like the train crashed right through where the house is now, and the train is coming back for me. So you built your house in a wrong spot. And like
Yeah.
the train's coming back for you. What do you mean?
Well, as funny as it was when he was holding his hands up and like, figuring out where he is, very kind of goofy looking. It
Mhm.
also was sad because
Yeah. Mhm.
it really just how many times he's played this out in his head and he knows exactly where it is, and
Mhm.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
comical in a way, but also just really sad for the
Yeah.
character.
There's definitely trauma, in
Yeah.
his past that he's kind of dealing with, and it doesn't really delve a whole lot into that. And that's one reason why, like, I'm only slightly positive because I don't really understand what you're supposed to take away from the ending.
Hmm.
So I mean, basically, like, they kind of think, oh, poor, you know, the son is like poor dad. He's kind of crazy. Um, and then, yeah, they they try to like, I guess, tranquilize him so he sleeps through the night. And because he keeps saying the train's coming for me tonight, I have my
Hmm.
ticket still, his old ticket he still has. Um, and then like the train does come, and the the grandson's like wakes him up, and the train
Yeah,
busts through the house, and
the kid screaming was pretty like it was like
yeah,
it was like slowing
Mom,
him
Dad,
down. Father coming.
the train is here.
Yeah.
So the train barrels through the house, and the grandson doesn't want his grandfather to go. It's kind of sad.
Mm.
But he's like, no, it's my time for the train to take me like it didn't before, and he
Mm.
boards the train, and the family kind of waves as the train, goes off into the night. And I don't know, it's pretty vague, I guess. I don't really understand. Like, so is it just like the grandpa's time to go, and this is how it's being visualized in this kind of fantastical way, or is it
Yeah.
a like examination of like how like sad but also like optimistic it can be to see like an old loved one go, that I don't know, it's kind of, I'm not really sure what to do with it.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, and it also in an emotional sense, for me was kind of the emotion of like I lost my grandparents at a very
Mm,
young age, like all my grandparents.
yeah.
And so it's like it felt like that was supposed to, but again, it's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm supposed like. Yes, losing my grandparents was sad, and I miss them, and I wish I knew them, especially as an adult.
Mhm.
But it just doesn't. Yeah, I didn't really understand what
Yeah.
I was supposed to get from it.
Yeah, because you don't know, like, okay, but where's the train taking him? Is it like, is this supposed to represent he's like dead now, or
Yeah,
which I guess it is. That would make the most sense, but I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it's a good idea that wasn't like fully fleshed out how to like
yeah,
land the plane, maybe, or
yeah,
or get the train to stop at the right stop. Maybe is a better analogy for this one. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Um, as far as motifs, it does hit some like strong Spielberg motifs. He had a train that he heard the lights and sounds from his New Jersey home as a kid that he's kind of
mhm,
reminiscing on. Um, he was close with his grandfather when he was young, and then they moved away. So maybe there's something to that, to kind of being really close to your grandfather and then kind of losing that connection, moving
Yeah.
far away. They moved to Arizona after New Jersey. And then there's also kind of like the kind of a recurring Spielberg theme of lack of understanding between generations.
Mm.
I think you can see that kind of throughout Spielberg's filmography in places, and that's definitely here for sure. Um, yeah, so you do get some Spielberg distinctives for theme, and then also like Spielberg distinctive shots. Like there's the kind of horizon shot with the sunrise or sunset or
Mhm.
whatever, with the silhouettes of the horizon and the stuff in the property. So that was a good shot.
Yeah.
You get like really strong emotion and close up shots, um, especially of like the old man and the boy, the grandson, which is for sure a Spielberg thing.
Mhm.
You get like some really good, like interestingly angled wide shots that kind of like set up both setting and character. Thinking about when they first arrive at the house, you get that wide shot. And so you're kind of taking in the setting, like, oh yeah, it's this new house, like there's not really much going on here. And then you're also like seeing the way the grandpa is like walking around the property. And so you're
Yeah.
you're doing some character building there. So yeah, I mean, definitely like, oh, and of course, like big cinematic action with the train breaking through the house. Like definitely a Spielberg thing.
Well, the train scene that made me well, it made me chuckle, but it also was like, this is so very Spielberg, was the toy train
Hmm.
falling over, because that is the Fableman, like,
Yeah,
inciting cinematographer event for him. Like that's
yeah,
when he decides, I want to film the train. Yeah.
hmm yeah. No, I agree for sure. Um, yeah, yeah. I did think this was interesting. The producer David E. Vogel said, "Ghost Train works wonderfully on a big screen. In a theater, you can create magic. On television, when sight and sound are limited, the visual leaps of basically like the visual leaps that you can take are also limited."
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that I think that was what. So we'll kind of talk about like how this wasn't a very well received. It didn't end up with good ratings. But that was kind of the producer thinking through like, okay, like this really would have actually benefited from being on a big screen. Doesn't play as well on a
Mm.
television set. And I think that's definitely there. Just thinking about that big cinematic like train busting through the house, like that'll look great on a movie screen. Um, and yeah, but yeah, so the mission. Let's hold off um on the mission, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Basically, Spielberg, they kind of start getting ready to release these episodes. Spielberg forbids the network from from showing any of them to journalists to preserve the mystery and suspense of the series. Um, but Brandon Tertikoff, the director of NBC Entertainment, thought this was a big error after very disappointing ratings for season one. This is what he had to say. He said, quote, "If I could do it all over, I would have taken the first 5 or 6 episodes and trotted them out on the press tour and gotten off on a better foot with the people who write about television."
Hmm.
And here's why. This episode airs, the first episode, September 29th, 1985. And what what ends up happening is like too much mystery kind of kills the mystery. Um, which makes sense when you don't give any people, like the media has nothing to go off of.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, the audience has no expectations, and so they can't make up their mind what they think
Yeah.
of it. Like they don't know, they had no clue it was going to be like kind of fantastical.
Hmm.
And then like as the series goes on, you know, it seems like Spielberg maybe didn't have a good grasp on kind of like what he wanted to do with the series. I wrote down Bob Gale, who had worked with him on 1941, said Steven never could make up his mind what the show was going to be. So is it going to be fantasy stuff? Is it going to be horror stuff? And then like Gale also kind of talked about how like maybe TV series aren't the best thing for directors like Spielberg because there's so many directions you can go. It's hard to have like one strong. He basically said Spielberg actually would have benefited by like going out and getting really good TV writers to write all of these. And he was more worried about like getting good directors for them. But the writing is what matters a bit more for TV than the directing. And so
I would agree.
Yeah. So
I think it's so much more constrained.
Yeah.
And I mean, imagine as well way less time for a director to even have, I don't know. I mean, how the back ends of movies work all the time, but it's like there's more of a budget and there's more of a timeline associated with making a movie as opposed to an episode of a TV show.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Yeah.
Although nowadays, who knows?
Yeah.
that could be very different now with the way Disney does things.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of things kind of working against it. It doesn't do that well. Let's just say that. Let's jump back and talk a bit about the mission. So this is the one that ended up in the kind of TV anthology movie that aired at one point, but it was also the 5th episode of season 1. New screenplay writer in Menno Meyjes. And he also brings on a new DP and John McPherson. The editor is Steven Kemper, who also edited Ghost Train. John Williams again for music. Michael C. Moore for sound, which I think is that a new guy? Nope, same guy. Same guy for sound. Richard B. Lewis for art direction, same guy. William Riley for visual effects, same guy. The set decorator was different, Richard B. Goddard. And then they had a special effects guy, Wayne Rose, on this one, which we'll see why when we talk about the movie. There's some special effects here. But yeah, and then you kind of have a little trio of actors that are not big yet, but will be bigger, or at least 2 of them will be bigger. Kevin Costner plays the captain. He's 30 years old in this movie, but hasn't had like a major splash yet. He was in the movie Fandango that had already come out in 1985, which was kind of a minor hit. But the bigger hit in Silverado by Lawrence Kasdan had not yet come out. It would come out later in 1985. That was kind of like his first big splash. And so you have Kevin Costner here, a young Kevin Costner, and then an even younger Kiefer Sutherland starting to
who
follow.
Somehow looks the same as he does now.
Yeah, he was 19 years old, just starting to follow in his dad Donald Sutherland's footsteps. So he plays Static in the movie. They all kind of have, it's set in World War II airplane crew, so they all kind of have, different nicknames. And then you have Casey. Let's see if I can get this last name. Moscow or Moscow. One of those. He plays Jonathan in the movie. He's also kind of at the beginning of his career, and he was actually with Kiefer Sutherland in Rob Reiner's 1986 movie Stand By Me, which had already filmed, I think, when they were doing this. That movie came out in 1986, but this was 85, so they had already done the filming work for it. But yeah, this was kind of a pet story for Spielberg, featuring planes and World War II. You get it's which he
So
needed
would
to.
this have been before Saving Private Ryan,
Yes.
or yeah.
Before his good World War II movies and after his absolutely horrible one in 1941. Do not recommend wasting time watching that movie. You can go listen to the episode. It was a fun discussion of it. But yeah, it's hard to recommend watching it unless you're just like really committed to being a completist.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, this movie follows a crew in a B-17 Allied bomber in World War II. They're trying to get back. I think they're just getting back to like a main base so that they can start working towards getting home. It seems like they're still like somewhere in Europe is where they're headed.
I think I said B-22 earlier.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, which is actually the black stealth bombers that we have.
Yeah.
Not B-17s.
Yeah,
I just remembered saying B-22 and I'm wanting to correct myself then. And I was like, it's no big deal. All right, let me talk about this episode. So yeah, it's a B-17s, guys.
Andrew,
30 minutes later.
Andrew knows what he's talking about, guys. He just messed up one time. Give him a break. Yeah, I didn't even catch it earlier, to be honest. Yeah, so they shot this so basically they're just trying to get back to the base. Is basically like there's the plot thickens, of course, but that's basically like what they're trying to do in the movie. Shot entirely at Universal Soundstage, just like the Ghost Train episode. They made like the interior of the B-17 bomber. They put like period objects in there for authenticity. He did switch to John McPherson as his DP, who was kind of better at this like darker atmosphere that they had to do for this film. And he ended up shooting 14 of the episodes. So he hung around the Amazing Stories studio, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, one of the things that I thought was really well done as far as like the filmmaking aspect was like the confinement feeling that you get, which I feel like is really well done. You get smoke and the lighting and the like very tight framing of everyone really like adds to that claustrophobic feel. Really well done. Spielberg just keeps shooting, and this ends up a longer episode than it's supposed to be like 25 minutes long, and it ends up being 46 minutes long. It was expanded, quote unquote, to 52 minutes to fit a regular TV slot. So I'm not sure. When I read that, I was confused because the episode is 46 minutes, and so I'm not sure how it was expanded in quotes to 52 minutes, because that's 6 more minutes. I don't know if maybe there was some deleted scenes that aired on.
Didn't make it.
Well, they would have to be added to make it longer. So,
well, no, I was saying that for some reason in the episodes that are out now we don't have. But when they say that, does that mean, is that including the time slot? Is that including like ad time? Or
I don't know. That's why I was confused. I was like, okay, that's 6 more minutes than I just watched. I don't know if that means the one that aired on TV was longer, or I don't know. They just put more commercials in. I don't know. So that was confusing, but but it was longer than it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be 25 minutes, and Spielberg was like, "Oh, this is my thing. I can just keep going if I want to, I guess." Which I'm kind of glad he
Who's
did
gonna stop
because
me?
I was pretty satisfied with the results. Um, yeah. Did you enjoy this one?
I I feel like this is the common thing, and maybe this is just a me problem.
Yeah.
Maybe me getting not knowing what I should get out of it. I should just reanalyze the thing. I liked, again, it just the resolution to me.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
didn't
Didn't
like.
it
I
didn't
also
land the
was
plane?
struggling. Huh? Yeah. I also was just kind of struggling to think like who the audience, like I'm assuming like adults or like
Yeah.
parents, maybe families even,
Mhm.
but like
I
it
would think
just
families, yeah.
families, yeah.
Mhm.
Because I'm like, it's pretty. I mean, Kiefer Sutherland static is gonna like mercy kill him. Like that's pretty dark, right? That's pretty.
Yeah, it is.
Let's watch Amazing Stories this week. Oh no, assisted, mercy
Euthanasia.
kill. Yeah. And then so that was confusing.
Yeah.
First of all, to me, and then second of all, it just, yeah, I don't know. The ending to me just felt confusing. I don't know. It's the power of imagination or
Yeah.
hope. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know, for
Which is
some reason I didn't really think about that in this one.
uh-huh.
I just kind of was like along for the ride. By the time it got, so I think here's where the difference was for me. I was positive on this episode. I didn't like love it. I wouldn't like go to bat for it and be like, no, you're wrong. It's just kind of like, oh, that was nice. I enjoyed that. And I think the difference with like the way it resolves for me is he had done such a really good job building the tension and then keeping the tension
Yeah.
through the
Yeah.
whole episode, which was just really impressive to me. When it ended, I was like, wow, like I felt the tension of the situation like that whole episode, and that feels like it's kind of hard to do for a whole 46-minute episode. And so, but I think because of that, because of being caught up in the tension and the stress of it all with the characters, by the time there was like the relief of, we'll just say it at the end. Okay, so let's back up so this makes sense, because this is one of those where like I could see people listening to this without having watched it because they're like, I'll probably just listen because I'm not planning on watching this. So basically, like, they are on their way. They have Jonathan, the Jonathan character. He's the belly turret gunner, and so he gets down there. They're flying. Some enemy planes show up. They kind of have a little firefight in the sky, which I think is really well done. Smart choice to have it foggy so that you can have the effect of a plane flying in a studio. Yeah, really well done as far as that goes. The visual effects there. But yeah, so he shoots, guns down one of the enemy planes. It breaks up, and then some of the shrapnel fragments like hit them. And one of the pieces jams into the side of the plane and has like basically like welded him like stuck in the turret. Which that's one thing. They're like, well, we'll just have to get him out when we get there. He's gonna have to stay in there, like cramped up down there the whole time. The other side thing is that Jonathan is like a cartoonist. He spends a lot of downtime, like making drawings. He's made drawings of like all of his friends and the crew, and they're all kind of like fun little cartoony drawings of the plane and stuff like that. And so that's kind of like another relevant note about his character. Well, it turns out the planes, the shrapnel from the enemy plane also has knocked out the landing gear. So there's no landing gear. which is a problem because Jonathan is stuck in the belly turret, and so you can't land the plane on its belly, which is possible without killing Jonathan in the process because he's in the belly. And so, yeah, they try some different things, trying to get him out, trying to get him a parachute that ends up ripping. But basically, time runs out. Jonathan is in the bottom of the plane. He starts like frantically drawing a realistic version of the plane, and then draws some like cartoon landing gears coming out of it, and just is like desperately looking at it, and tells the captain, which is Kevin Costner's character, to try the landing gear again. And lo and behold, as as Jonathan desperately stares at his drawing of these cartoon landing gear wheels, he flips the switch and cartoon landing gear pops out of the bottom of the plane. One of the, I guess, probably an early version of some CGI work being done here. And so, yeah, I don't know. So that's the part that Andrew's saying, like, okay, what is the point here? Which I can totally see. Here's why I was fine with it, because I was so caught, like I was saying, I was so caught up in the tension and the stress that by the time there was the relief of the cartoon, it just kind of like made me chuckle and was like, oh, I'm so glad that he's not gonna die. Like,
Yeah.
that I just kind of accepted it. And I don't know, it kind of fits in a little bit too with just the Spielberg motif of being in like wonder and fantasy.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's pretty corny. I don't know that it's necessarily like meant to say anything. I think that's the difference. When we were talking about Ghost Train, it feels like the ending is it felt like it was trying to say something. And with this one, I'm not sure that it was trying to necessarily like say anything profound. I think it was just like, hey, this is a movie, and this, like, I guess maybe if it's saying anything, it's like the artist Jonathan, like, came up with the solution for the ending of the movie so that he didn't have to die, and that's nice. And I guess that's kind of how I felt about it. I'm like, oh, you know, these corny like CGI landing gears like came out of the plane, but oh, this character that I really like doesn't have to die. That's nice.
Yeah.
The power of art and movie making. But I don't know. I enjoyed it overall. Not like I said, not phenomenal. Just like perfectly enjoyable 46-minute episode.
Yeah, and it was like the production, the stuff you were saying about the production design.
So it was really good.
It was really well done, but then that, to me, it just felt.
To what end, I guess?
Yeah, because to have, and maybe that's the whimsical, kind of goofy concentration spell that he casts to, animate the wheels. I'm saying that because then when they pulled him out, he was like in a trance almost.
Yeah, he was.
It seemed like
they had to slap him.
And wake up, bam, bam, and then the wheels
disappear,
and the plane falls.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I guess it was, a concentration spell he's casting, but I don't know. It just was kind of, just a little too goofy for me.
Yeah.
Given the grim setting of I'm gonna mercy kill him,
Yeah.
but also not discuss it with him at all. Like, to just stick the gun.
Ask him.
It just, if I was down there, I'd want to go easier than getting ground by the plane. So yeah, that.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
The grimness of that thing, to me, the problem with it was it could have been used as a, like, I thought he was just going to hand him the gun in case he wanted to do, and then that would have almost made it more like choosing. That might have still been weird. I don't know. It just felt really weird, really problematic to be like, not even addressing it.
I see where you're coming from. So here was my thing. When I was watching that, I wasn't even thinking about it in that way at that point. I was caught up in the tension of it with the way that it was edited. So it's the way it's edited, you're going back and forth between the captain up front trying to figure out what he's going to do because they're coming up on their landing. You've got Jonathan frantically drawing his drawing, and then you've got Kiefer like about to maybe mercy kill him so he doesn't have to like go through the horrible death of being smushed in the under the plane. And so like I was kind of caught up in like the tension of jumping between those three things. And I wasn't even, honestly, it wasn't even on my mind at that point of like, is this like morally okay? Because obviously, like, if you do want to think about that, like, obviously it's not, but also like the character is just like totally stressed out and not thinking straight and not emotionally stable. So, I don't know. Like, all that to say, like, I wasn't even thinking about that at that point. I was just, because I mean, you're totally right in hindsight, but when I was in the moment, I was just like caught up in the tension of it all.
No, it's kind of just speaking to a grim like reality about people in those kinds of situations.
For sure.
It's awful and traumatic and painful and so it's I'm not saying it couldn't have been addressed. It just was such a strange, I don't know, I don't want to say like, oh, it was dishonorable way, but it's just like it was just almost too comical for me to be sticking the gun into the belly without even talking about it. And I don't know, it just was for that. And then the cartoon wheels, just for me, that just sent me over the edge. I was like, okay, sure. I don't this was not enjoyable for those two reasons, but everything else, it was, production design was good and the tension was there.
No, I agree. It also like has a really great opening shot. Like it's like the camera starts off with some more guys working on like part of the plane, and it like it does this like backwards tracking shot through the fog under the plane, under the belly of the plane, up, and then I realized like I thought it was just like a backwards tracking dolly, but then I realized like, oh, it's a crane, because then the camera starts like moving up too, and you end up with this wide shot of the plane and all the crew talking, and I was like, oh, this is such a great establishing shot. Calling on the name of the podcast, but I was like, oh, that was so good. And then, I felt like filmmaking wise, this was really well done. You do get a lot of like classic Spielberg close-ups with like strong emotion on characters' faces, and the tension building is really well done, and the editing plays a lot into that. And then like it is kind of like highly emotional and sentimental at the end, I think, which can be very Spielberg. But yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed these. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I enjoyed these two more than Spielberg's Twilight Zone segment. But I'm not sure I enjoyed them more. I guess like if you take all 5 of these or all 6 of these as individual things, it would be between like the ones I enjoyed the most would be the Good Life segment by Joe Dante, the 20,000 Nightmare at 20,000 Feet by George Miller, and then the Mission episode by Spielberg. I think those would be the 3 that I walk away with like, oh, I'm glad I saw those. Like those were, and I enjoyed watching those.
Yeah.
The Ghost Train was just fine. Like I could take it or leave it. Like more likely like leave it. Like yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Then the two Twilight Zone segments we've already talked about not liking.
Right. And I don't want to go too far, into talking about his other films specifically, but it's like I do like the way he, and just to also show, like, he doesn't own sharks, right? Because he made Jaws.
Right.
He just very, very effectively showed the horror of like that kind of predator in its element, right? And then also the characters all the characters were like, it was just interesting, right?
Characters
to
are great.
compare that, yes, to compare that to something like the Meg, right? It's like same concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so poorly executed. And I mean, I know that's not the point, but necessarily, but it definitely is something he does well.
Yeah.
And so I can only imagine that maybe part of the reason, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I would have liked this ending if it had been a film more. But the point is just like, I think the time frame plays a part, right? It's such a much shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
And yeah, just I feel like he's very good at that in his other films. Mm-hmm. So it just, to me, maybe that's the problem, is I was wanting it to be something it wasn't, and I wasn't just,
that's fair.
TV show, watch it. Yeah.
I think too, like he is a great like character builder.
Yes.
That's one of the things and usually he's pretty efficient at it. And so in his Twilight Zone segment, like there's not great character development there, but I think that all goes back to just like he just like was done. Like I almost like want to just write that off as just like he didn't even want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
Like why would he put his heart and soul into making that segment when he just really just the whole there's just that from the tragedy, there's just a shadow over the whole thing that like it's hard to like take it with any amount of like critical seriousness, because it's like those guys are just, they didn't want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's
a good point.
Yeah, I think there's like an asterisk on the kick the can segment. I will say Ghost Train and the Mission do decent, like efficient character building. Like you get a pretty good sense of like the relationship dynamics between the old man, the parents, and the grandson. Like pretty quickly, like you kind of get a grasp on that. And so it's just like a matter of like how it ends, and does it like where does it lead to is the problem with that one. And then the mission has okay character building. I think there's too many in the crew. You kind of can get lost in like, wait, who is who? You have the main three in the Costner, Sutherland, and the Casey's character, but those are like the main three. But there's a lot of other ones too that we didn't even mention that like you can kind of get lost in like who's who, and so that kind of probably distracts. The Jonathan character I think is really well developed in that movie. I mean in that episode, but so you do get some Spielberg character development, but not to the same effect as like you said, Jaws or Close Encounters or E.T. or any of the one, or especially like Raiders. Like talk about like efficient character development. Like Raiders is like the example of that. But yeah, so I don't know. Yeah. This one aired in November 3rd of 1985. I wrote down from one of my sources, it suffered from direct competition with Murder, She Wrote on CBS. And I was like, yeah, my mom would have been watching Murder, She Wrote, not Amazing Stories. My mom loved Murder, She
Yeah,
Wrote. I saw
I've actually
I saw
seen
many an
some.
episode growing up
Yeah,
because my mom would have it on.
yeah. I feel like I've seen uh, a lot of those episodes as well.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
decent show. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the second season aired to similar fate. And Spielberg just kind of eventually gave the project up. I think he was originally going to direct a couple of the second season episodes too, but
Mhm.
didn't end up doing that and just kind of wrapped up and finished. The show did win 5 Emmy Awards, and The Mission won 2 of them for the cinematography by John McPherson and the sound editing, which makes sense. I think
Yeah.
those were. I think the cinematography and sound were pretty well done in The Mission, so makes sense. The thing that one of the things that Amazing Stories did do was it kind of ended up being like a laboratory for ideas and talents. So you have the CGI cartoon landing gear and The Mission kind of foreshadowing things like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which Steven Spielberg produced.
Mhm.
And then Brad Bird writes and directs an episode called Family Dog, which was a cartoon episode that ended up becoming a full-fledged series produced by Amblin Entertainment 6 years later. So that came out of it. Never heard of it. But
Yeah.
I'm
Neither have
I would say the more notable thing is that Brad Bird would go on to direct, Iron Giant, and then he directed Monsters Inc. Maybe he's got a couple of Finding Nemo. I think Finding Nemo is Brad Bird.
I.
He has one other Pixar movie too. For some reason, I'm thinking Monsters Inc., but that might not be right.
But he was Iron Giant.
Yeah, Iron Giant was his directorial debut.
Okay.
In a feature film. He also directed Ghost Protocol, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Tomorrowland, which I've never seen.
Neither have I.
Yeah. But yeah.
I just when you said Iron Giant, to me that just well, as conflicted as the portrayal is in Ready Player One of the peaceful it's there.
Yeah.
It's good, just funny. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I love the Iron Giant. So
I like Ready Player One too. I've just been wanting to bring that up and talk about it a little bit, just because there's another thing of Spielberg's that I did really like. And when I saw that movie, I don't know that I was like in like super focused on director mode.
Sure.
That's been like the last several years for me, really. But it definitely speaks to how I feel about his other work too. So
for sure.
I don't want the impression to be that I don't like Spielberg.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. The only other thing I had noted for this before we start wrapping up with final thoughts is that Batteries Not Included, which was directed by Matthew Robbins in 1987, was initially intended to be an episode of Amazing Stories. So there you go. So, like I said, a laboratory of ideas and talents. Yeah, that's the Twilight Zone movie and Amazing Stories. Let me ask you this, as we're just for some final thoughts. Are anthology movies good? Should we have more anthology movies, Andrew?
I will sidestep the question and say only if there's one director. I don't know. It's for what it is to me, for it being already a collection of small things that are piecemeal together to make a whole, right? I feel like it has to have a consistent director,
sure,
or directors with a consistent goal.
Yeah.
And I would say I don't feel like this was a good example of that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I I feel like I probably need to just like see more. Um,
Yeah, that's also fair.
yeah,
I
because
don't have a lot to base this off of.
yeah, I've seen some, uh, but yeah, it's hard to I get it's hard to know like okay what's like so for example like Chungking Express by Wong Kar-wai is a phenomenal movie. It's technically an anthology. It has two separate stories in one, but it's the same director. I also really enjoy a couple of Jim Jarmusch movies that are anthologies. Night on Earth and Coffee and Cigarettes are those two. Really enjoy those, but those are the same director. And so I think there is something to like an anthology movie can be really good, but most of the time it's the best if it's like the same director directing all three, or not necessarily three, but
Yeah.
however many segments, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But yeah, I haven't seen movies like New York Stories. That a lot of great directors there, Coppola, Scorsese, Woody Allen. I haven't seen that. So I don't know. I'd like to like take in a couple of more like ones with well-known directors where there's like more than one director, and then maybe make a more informed judgment of anthology movies. But
that's definitely fair.
Yeah.
Because I don't. I'm having a real. I can't actually think of another anthology film that I've seen.
Yeah.
But
I mean, obviously you have ones like Fantasia, like the old Disney collections.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
But
those.
that's kind of it's a little different. It's hard to compare because I love Fantasia, but it's a little bit different. It's hard to like compare it one to one with like Twilight Zone the movie or the French Dispatch. It's a little different. Yeah, and then kind of wrapping up everything, a lot of our talk revolved around the tragedy that happened on set. So the other final thought question I had was, should studios give directors full control over their projects? Like absolute full control and power. Because it's a catch-22, I think.
Yeah.
A bit. It's like you want to give them full creative control, but also like there is sort of a reason why like studios exist, and there's a bit of like keeping reins on certain like creators so that they don't go like off the rails.
Yeah. I don't know. The thing that I thought about, because it's something I just recently learned that it kind of applies. It definitely applies to this discussion. Is actually I watched a really interesting video of it was compare and contrast of David Lynch's Dune and Denis Villeneuve. But the video talked about calling it David Lynch's Dune might upset David Lynch, and it showed some interviews with David Lynch, and it was really sad that hearing him talk about it was like a slow death. I was selling out in the script writing process, and so he's saying it wasn't his vision. Now, I guess the fair question is, if it had been completely his vision, I personally didn't enjoy it. Would it have been more enjoyable? Maybe, but to me, the sad thing is to see him not having had that full control over something that he had a very specific vision for, right? It was a big, the way it was described was, I think maximalist, like very over the top.
Sure.
Whereas, the new Dune is much more muted, but serious. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I think it's for David Lynch, yes, but
no,
I don't know.
I think it's a balance. Is at the end of the day, like the studio is stepping over a line when they're saying like, "Hey, we know this is the direction you're headed, but oh, wouldn't it be nice if, this character did this, or this character,
Yeah.
had a happier ending, or this there's a lot of that going on with like studios and producers, like stepping over lines over the creative storytelling that the director's aiming for. But then like there's also the like there's there's also like, hey, Hitchcock, we're gonna have to kick you off this movie if you don't stop throwing birds at your lead actress,
Yeah.
So there's also that, like, oh, it's for the creative vision of the director. It's like, well, no, like you got to figure out another way to get that vision.
Oh yeah.
So
There's a line for sure.
I mean, you're on set for shooting John Landis's segment of Twilight Zone, and everyone's like, well, I don't want to get blacklisted. I don't want to like make John Landis mad. And there's a degree to which it's like, no, there should be somebody there telling him like, hey, you can't do this. You've got to.
There should be oversight
Right.
for abuse and safety violations. But I guess specifically what I was thinking is
creatively, it's like
creatively, right.
But sometimes like those things overlap, I guess where for the context of this discussion and what brought on this question with the tragedy, when the times where it overlaps, it's like, yeah, this there should be a leash on the director and what they're allowed to get away with. So yeah, I don't know. I guess in the context of this, it's more cut and dry. There's definitely a more interesting discussion to be had on studios and the creative process of directors. You could get into like what would Sam Raimi's Multiverse of Madness been like if they would have really let him be Sam Raimi. But it is what it is. In the context of this discussion, somebody should have stepped in for sure.
Well, and it's so funny how the differences contrast, because it's like the problem to me with like the two example, like Sam Raimi and then David Lynch, is a little more iffy for me, as but the point is those two discussions, it's risk aversion and finance that kept something better potentially from happening, in giving the director more freedom or more time to make the movie. It's risk aversion, and then in this case it's risk oblivious. They're being oblivious to risk, and so because it's the director making an unsafe call, so it is it's different.
It is. You're right. Yeah. And I think too, like it makes me think about like, this is totally going down more of the discussion of like creativity, but like it makes me think of shoot, I'm trying to think of his name. It's not coming to me off the top of my head. The director of American Fiction, in his speech at the Oscars. It's like on the.
I can't think of his name right now. It's
on the tip of my tongue, and it's just not coming to me. I'm very upset about it. But anyways, his speech about like, hey, maybe instead of doing a $200 million movie, you can do, 20 $10 million movies. And then like, you don't have to be so risk averse, because like some of those can fail and some of those can succeed, and maybe one or two might like really hit. And so, you don't have to be so risk averse in allowing like directors to really like go after their vision. Because you're not like throwing $200 million at one thing, you're throwing it at 20 different things. And if you're making smart decisions and like trusting people that seem like they're have a strong creative vision, then like something's gonna hit. Did you pull up his name?
The director is Cord Jefferson.
Cord Jefferson. Man. Feels like I should remember the name Cord, but I don't. But yeah, that's it. That's it for our discussion of the Twilight Zone movie and Amazing Stories. I think I rated the Twilight Zone movie with 2.5 stars. Those 2.5 stars being mostly for segment 3 and 4. I saw your wife gave it a solid 1 star on Letterboxd.
Yes. I would maybe give it 1.5. I don't know.
That's fair. No,
yeah.
I just, it seems like I enjoyed those last segments more than you, which is mostly where my 2.5 stars is coming from. But I have my Spielberg ranked list up, and it's like it's way down at the bottom. Amazing Stories is also on Letterboxd as the like anthology TV thing. I rated it. I was struggling. It's like a 3 or 3.5 stars for me. Because I rated it just for the mission because I haven't seen the other 2 segments that are included in that. So I'm cheating on Letterboxd and rating it for just one segment instead of for all 3. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's kind of I could see it ending up as like a middling, like middling or maybe lower middling once I've become a Spielberg completist eventually. But yeah. Yep, that's pretty much it. I don't have really anything else to talk about on these movies. I think we hit it all.
Yeah. I think we had a good discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, we have next week coming up real soon. We are going to be talking about The Color Purple. That's next up on the list. Spielberg's it's going to be a different movie for Spielberg, I think. So it should be a very fun and interesting discussion covering The Color Purple. I have been listening to the audiobook to prepare for watching the movie, so it's going to be interesting to compare those. But yeah, that is coming up next week, The Color Purple. Andrew, is there anywhere you would like people to follow you? I think last time you were like, just Letterboxd is good.
Yeah, just Letterboxd. I mean, we were discussing earlier. I don't post on any social media pretty much, and I even struggle to post on Letterboxd. But yeah, if anyone's inclined, that's probably the best place.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to link your profile in the episode description so people can just go click on it there. Follow Andrew on Letterboxd and see his occasional logs and reviews there.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I try to keep up with what I see.
Whenever I see one pop up by you, I make sure and go look at what you have to say. So
yeah, I don't always put anything too witty or insightful, but I try to at least keep log of what I've seen.
Yeah.
For the first time.
Yeah. No, yeah. Letterboxd. I love Letterboxd. But yeah, I've talked about that before. But yeah, that's all we have for this week. Color Purple next week. But until then, I've been Eli Price for Andrew Fossier. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.